This can't be happening. Trouble in paradise. The Polish administration has started to show the sentiment of the European Union, which is increasingly against Zelensky, or at least no longer wants to work as closely with him as before. Not only that, but listen to this. There are voices from different countries, for example, from France itself, saying that it's time to leave the European Union. Well, little by little, there's talk of an anti Ukrainian atmosphere. And this, for example, is what's happening, as we've said, with countries like Poland. And in this case, we have to talk about what the Polish prime minister has said to Zelensky, basically blaming him for all of this. In fact, he himself has said that, sometimes they get the feeling that Poland isn't being well received, that people aren't grateful for the efforts of the Polish administration, right? That not all Ukrainians appreciate those efforts. Well, it only took 2 years, massive deaths, the exodus of an entire country, right? The economic collapse of a country that no longer has any money and needs to borrow funds for the next 2 years, just for Poland to finally realize that many people, even within the government itself, are not in favor of Zelensky. There is opposition, and there are also citizens who do not support what's happening right now. They really aren't in favor of the war. So, well, it's incredible but true. Apparently, in the minds of the officials, the Poles always had to be grateful. They always had to keep quiet and be thankful for what was happening. Even though, again, this is a war that isn't necessarily what the Ukrainian citizens themselves are looking for. And, well, despite this whole situation, what Poland is saying is that it's all Zelensky's fault because he's not being grateful. During his meeting with the leader of the Kyiv regime, he said it to his face. The Polish president stated that Poles and Ukrainians must show the utmost understanding and patience with each other, as well as reflect sensibly on a shared future. Sometimes we get the feeling in Poland that not all Ukrainians appreciate our efforts. Sometimes Ukrainians feel that the atmosphere there has become a bit less pro-Ukrainian. Yes, it's true. We have a lot to talk about, even regarding the past. We must be very patient and understanding. That's what the European official said, in this case, Mr. Tusk, who, with his words, shows that little by little, countries within the European Union are getting tired. And that's a reality. It's not something we're making up. And the clearest example, as we've already discussed here, is the case of Italy, right? Italy, which has decided to stop sending aid to Ukraine, arguing that that's enough, it's over, that they should negotiate peace, and that everyone should use their own resources as best they can to help their own country. And, well, with all this, it's also necessary to talk about the Polish president. We just saw the prime minister, but pay attention to what the Polish president has done, who couldn't think of anything better than, well, giving Zelensky a little gift, a book. A book about Ukrainian nationalist crimes. And this, in fact, we've already talked about in the past. The Polish president demanded from Zelensky that, hey, at the very least, they should come forward and say they're sorry, right? To apologize for what happened or for the way the Ukrainians executed, wiped out the Poles, especially around the time of World War II. But what's most striking here is that the only thing Zelensky managed to say at the time was that he didn't know anything. That's it. All right, take care. See ya. Of course, a pretty empty response to what was, in this case, a rather uncomfortable initiative from Poland once again. So Mr. Karol Narodowski, as we know the Polish president, has given a gift, in this case to the leader of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, one that could reopen wounds in the relationship between the two neighboring nations, according to some media reports. During Zelensky's official visit to Warsaw on Friday, Narodowski himself received the Ukrainian leader at the presidential palace and, in a face-to-face meeting, gave him a 2-volume book titled Documents of the Crimes of Volhynia. This was reported, wrote the Polish press. Again, it's a rather aggressive book against what the Ukrainian administration did, as we've said. And by the way, the study was published in 2023 when it was carried out when Narodowski was president of that organization. In other words, he knew it very well, based on testimonies from witnesses of the massacres of the Polish civilian population at the hands of Ukrainian nationalists during World War II. As we've said, they haven't even issued an apology for the matter, but nevertheless, they keep asking the Poles for money. They keep asking the Europeans for money. So, in the photo, with a picture of Zelensky that Narodowski has posted on his social media, the one you're seeing on screen, you can even see it, right? The two volumes are on a table next to the Polish president. Is Zelensky going to read this? Is Zelensky at least going to have the decency to, apologize or offer some kind of understanding for what happened? Because, of course, Poland's position is that Ukrainian, none, no Ukrainian president in history has ever apologized for this situation, which is very different from what other countries have done, even Nazi Germany itself. So we'll see how this ends up developing, but as we always say, there are no coincidences in geopolitics. This specifically is not a coincidence. It's the result of the increasingly worrying tensions between the European Union and Ukraine. Because, yes, the European Union is getting tired. And also, if we're talking about being tired, why not talk about what's happening with France? A French media outlet and a French politician have echoed this, calling for France to leave the European Union. No more, no less. According to the politician, there is no other option. We're talking about Florian Philippot, whom we've already mentioned in previous videos, who has called for people to stand firm and intensify protests against the free trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur. And also, of course, since the security of the bloc's member countries is not being safeguarded, there's no longer any point in being a member of the European Union. So, with such aggressive words, we're starting to see increasingly strong divisions, aren't we? So, the leader of the French party Les Patriotes, Florian Philippot, stated today that France leaving the European Union is the only way to save the country's agriculture in light of the possible signing of the free trade agreement between the EU and the Mercosur countries. That's the level things have reached. And we've already talked about this. More and more, we're going to start hearing voices from countries that disagree, that want to leave the European Union, and countries that are, let's say, although it's sad because every country should matter equally or have the same importance, but there are countries that have more impact within the European Union, right? And, well, talking about France also means talking about its nuclear umbrella. So in this case, most experts are saying that France's exit, the possible exit of France, would be the final nail in the coffin for the European Union. So, well, what the official himself has said in this case is that they even already have a name for this exit. It would be called Frexit, right? France's exit from all fronts of the battle, since, as he has emphasized, there is no other solution to save French agriculture. Not only that, but some are already talking about Frexit, within political parties. And here's a curious fact, right? There are many, really many, who agree with this situation. I'd like to ask you all a question. Do you think France will leave the European Union? Once again, there are no coincidences in geopolitics. This also has to do with the fact that they decided to bet on Ukraine, and that bet didn't turn out so well, to say the least. I'm reading your comments.